to use shapes. Now, I'm not going to build up lots of information on here, but just to show you the kind of shapes that can be used. You might have other sections, and you can use, for example, rectangles to signify certain kinds of ideas. You can have triangles, circles, spheres, all kinds of shapes to show you how the pattern in your mind is in fact thinking in those forms. And of course, in addition to simply this kind of shape, you can make it actually stand off the page by making it more dimensional. So instead of having just a square, you can take your square and make it into a cube and print whatever words you wish to print on the cube where they should actually fit. All of this, as you can see, is making the thing more dimensional, showing that the interrelationships are not just flat on the page, but off it. Now, in addition to these, there are more methods. You can use codes. You might think that a particular idea you have on your pattern is a very good one, so you put an exclamation mark. That could also mean perhaps importance. There could be something that you consider to be particularly correct or accurate, so you might put a check mark. In addition to this, you can add things like asterisks for points that you consider to be important. If you're taking notes from a lecture, you might find that you want to question certain of the things that have been said, so you code with a question mark. So this pattern begins to build up the kind of structural information pattern that actually is in your mind. Now, in addition to that, you can see that we've already used a further method, and that is color. But color can be used even more widely than what we've done here. You might decide that a given part of a pattern here coincides or relates in some way to an idea you have down here. So you color code. The minute you look at that pattern, you see that those two colors immediately relate the information, associate the ideas. Now, you can use color in addition to map out certain idea areas within the pattern. So you could perhaps circle this branch of the idea here, with a color which shows you the shape and overall construct of that particular section of the pattern. Now, one could go on building up this kind of pattern forever. But what you see there is an idea that is coming off the page, becoming almost a vibrant, dimensional, colored, structured, shaped projection of the kind of thing that actually goes on in your mind. Now, knowing all this about it now will make you more able to jot down some ideas for the application to which these kind of patterns can be put. So if you'd just like to take a piece of paper and jot down a few ideas. Now, did you make a list, or did you make a pattern on the use of patterns? And here are some others that other people have prepared. Here, for example, is a pattern by a man analyzing his business and his education. Here's a pattern of self-analysis. The next two are by people who've been following courses similar to this series. You'll probably recognize some of the words. And here's a marvelous example of 3 dimensions. You'll probably recognize some of the words. And here's a marvelous example of 3 dimension. And this one is by my producer, who nearly lost her job immediately after having done it. Now, I've talked about the three-dimensional nature of these patterns and the various ways in which they can be used for creative thinking, for note-taking, for problem-solving, for meetings, for recording diaries. In fact, for anything that is concerned with words, images, and the way that your mind interrelates them. But there are two other major advantages. And I want to imagine here that you're building up a pattern of your own information on a subject which is of particular interest to you. Now, as you read, study, learn from newspapers and so on, imagine that you're building up this pattern. And I'll just represent, so we get some idea of the extent to which this pattern will go. You'll be adding the other words for the definition, you'll be talking about visual aids, and so on. But the pattern, in the end, becomes gigantic. At this particular stage, in other words, when you've received information from various sources and noted it down on a growing organic pattern, not just a piece of note that you put down, forget, and then just leave, a growing pattern. What happens at this stage is that suddenly the other disciplines begin to impose themselves or interrelate into yours. In other words, the boundaries of your pattern of information begin to coincide with the boundaries of information from other disciplines. Now, we could take an example here. When you're talking about the eye, you might start to project up about light and how that enters your eye, which very soon gets you into things like physics and philosophy, and obviously the psychology of perception. So at this stage, your pattern is becoming an environmentally enclosed one. Information isn't isolated, it's totally interlinked with all the other information that's around it. So the understanding of your subject becomes greater because you're understanding its interrelationship with the other subjects. Now also, as this kind of pattern builds up, as you receive the information from lectures and books, you find that you can more readily identify areas which have gaps in them, mistakes, and also, and this is particularly important, those areas where the experts are disagreeing. Now, those areas are usually on the periphery of your subject, but rather than, as happens in many cases, understanding the positions from a linear point of view, you can understand this kind of position in the context of all the other information, which means at that stage you are able to make a significant, meaningful, and perhaps helpful contribution to the discussion, disagreement, and argumentation that's going on over that part of the subject. So you see that as the pattern grows, this organic whole, which is a reflection of your own mind, everything within it becomes more totally integrated, and note-taking actually changes. It's no longer a static recording process. It is the organic whole from which you base certain of your statements. It becomes, in other words, a foundation for creativity, for organization, and for integration. So pattern making really does free your mind. Now, in the previous programs, I've asked you to send in questions about anything that you want further information on. So perhaps this time you'd like to send in questions in pattern form. I'd like to see those. And now, here's a man who really knows how to get it together.
Mr. Linear Man and Mr. Pattern Man eagerly await the delivery of 2 kits from Constructor Shed Limited. Mr. Linear Man studies his instructions carefully, line by line. Meanwhile, Mr. Pattern Man keywords his instructions and begins to build up a fantastic pattern. Mr. Linear Man can't believe his eyes. Mr. Pattern Man already has that B7 in place. Sometime later, Mr. Pattern Man puts the final touch to his super constructor shed. Uh-oh, just look at that mess. Har, har, har.